All right, so get ready because we're about to deep dive into some really interesting stuff about the JFK assassination.
Oh, yeah.
We've got a whole stack of research articles here from the Dealey Plaza Echo,
Okay.
and they're all about Lee Harvey Oswald lookalikes.
Fascinating.
You know, I think you're really going to like this one because we're going to be untangling some pretty complex topics.
Right.
And I can guarantee there will be some surprising twists and turns along the way.
Looking forward to it.
So, the idea that there were Oswald impersonators running around before the assassination,
Uh-huh.
it's not just some crazy conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
It actually came about because there were so many reports of people seeing Oswald in different places,
Right.
sometimes doing things that could be seen as incriminating.
Uh-huh.
And this brings up some really important questions about how thorough the official investigation really was.
For sure.
And it opens the door to all sorts of alternative theories about what might have happened.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes you wonder if we're getting the whole story.
Right? Like a historical puzzle with pieces that seem to fit in multiple ways.
Exactly.
So let's jump into this stack of research
Okay.
and see if we can make some sense of it all.
Sounds good to me.
So I think a good place to start is with this guy named John Thomas Mason.
Okay.
He was a 23-year-old gun shop owner in Dallas.
Interesting.
Even his name sounds like it came straight out of a spy novel.
Oh, I know, right?
So what makes this Mason guy so important to this whole story?
Well, the FBI questioned him about selling 6.5 millimeter Mannlicher Carcano ammunition, the same kind that was supposedly used to kill Kennedy.
Oh, wow.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh.
A law enforcement official described Mason as being practically identical to Oswald.
What?
Yeah, like they were twins, separated at birth, same build, same hair, same features.
No way.
I know, it's crazy.
So hold on, we have a guy who looks exactly like Oswald,
Uh-huh.
selling the same type of ammo used in the assassination.
Right.
And this is all happening just weeks before Kennedy is shot. This is incredibly suspicious.
No doubt about it. It definitely raises some questions.
Yeah, like, was Mason being set up to take the fall for something?
That's one possibility.
Or was he actually part of something much bigger?
Well, let's dig a little deeper and see what we can find.
Okay, so let's talk about Mason's connections.
Right.
Because I have a feeling this is where things get even more complicated.
You're telling me.
So Mason was supplying weapons to Cuban exiles who were planning another invasion of Cuba.
Interesting.
Now, this would have made anti-Kennedy factions absolutely furious.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So we're already starting to see some potential motives emerging here.
Definitely. And it doesn't end there.
Okay, what else?
Well, Mason was also linked to some pretty hardcore right-wing groups.
Like who we're talking about?
Groups like the Minutemen and possibly even the John Birch Society.
Wow.
Both of those groups were very strongly opposed to Kennedy and his policies.
Right.
And to make things even more suspicious, he was arrested multiple times in the days leading up to the assassination. Seriously.
At least once, directly related to the events of November 22nd.
It's starting to sound less like a coincidence and more like a carefully planned plot.
It really does make you think, doesn't it?
Yeah, like this Mason guy wasn't just some random dude on the fringes of society.
Not at all.
Yeah.
He was connected to powerful groups.
Right.
Groups with the resources and the motive to want Kennedy gone.
So the question is, what was his exact role in all of this?
That's a million-dollar question, isn't it?
And it leads us to another layer of this puzzle. The numerous Oswald sightings that were reported before the assassination.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
Were these really Oswald, or was it someone impersonating him?
Well, there are definitely some compelling cases to consider.
Like what?
For example, several witnesses placed Oswald at a shooting range,
Right.
practicing with a modified Italian carbine, a different weapon than the one that was officially linked to the assassination.
Interesting.
And then there were sightings of Oswald at a fundraising event for the DRE,
And who are they?
a Cuban exile group. Okay. But get this, General Edwin Walker was also at that event. And who's that? He was a right-wing figure that Oswald had allegedly tried to assassinate earlier that year.
Really?
So was Oswald secretly a sharpshooter? Or was this lookalike trying to frame him by making him look guilty even before the assassination took place?
I mean, it almost seems like someone was setting him up.
Yeah, that's definitely one interpretation.
And there's the Odio incident,
Right.
which throws yet another wrench into things.
Tell me about it.
Sylvia Odio, a Cuban exile, claimed that Oswald visited her with two Latin men,
Uh-huh.
one of whom said he was a friend of Fidel Castro.
A friend of Castro.
Yeah, that's what she said.
That's a strange detail to include if you're trying to frame someone for assassinating a staunch anti-communist president.
I know, right?
Yeah,
It really makes you question what was going on here.
exactly.
So later on, a man claiming to be Oswald called Odio and said that the group was planning to kill Kennedy.
Yeah. Now, was this a genuine confession from Oswald? Or was it Mason or perhaps another look-alike playing a part in some elaborate plot to discredit Oswald?
It's hard to say for sure.
So was Oswald involved with people who wanted Kennedy dead? Or was this whole incident a fabrication to make him look guilty?
It's definitely possible.
It just highlights how complex and layered this whole event really is.
Oh, absolutely. There are so many different threads, so many conflicting accounts
Right.
that it's almost impossible to separate fact from fiction.
Like a hall of mirrors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You think you're getting closer to the truth, but then you realize you're just looking at a distorted reflection. And you know it's not just the Odio incident,
Right.
where it seems like someone was trying to make Oswald look bad.
Uh-huh.
Remember that whole thing with the Irving Sports Shop?
Oh, yeah. What was that all about?
That's like someone wanted to make sure Oswald was blamed even after he was dead.
Yeah, it's really strange.
The day Oswald was killed, anonymous calls went out to
Yeah.
the media and the FBI, saying that Oswald had his rifle repaired at this specific shop in Irving, Texas.
Okay, but why wait until he couldn't defend himself?
Right.
That's a good question. Like, if you're trying to frame someone, wouldn't you want to do it while they're still alive?
Yeah, you'd think so. So then what? Well, a repair tag shows up with Oswald's name on it.
At the shop.
Right. But the owner and employee both say they never saw Oswald there.
So we've got a mystery rifle, a mystery repair tag, and now mysterious tipsters who magically appear after Oswald is dead.
It's all very suspicious.
So was this a genuine lead about a different rifle or just another attempt to make the investigation more confusing?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out, isn't it?
And then there's the FBI's involvement,
Oh, yeah.
which makes you wonder if there was even more going on behind the scenes.
What do you mean?
Well, it turns out the FBI knew about Mason's illegal arms dealing,
They did.
but they didn't tell the Warren Commission.
The group that was investigating the assassination.
You're kidding me.
Yeah.
They knew this guy, who looked just like Oswald, was involved in shady business and maybe even connected to groups that didn't like Kennedy.
It seems like it.
And they didn't think that was important.
Apparently not.
It sounds like they were more focused on getting information about the Cuban exiles than on figuring out what Mason's role was.
That's what it looks like.
I mean, come on, that's a pretty big detail to leave out.
It is.
Why would they withhold information about someone who was so closely linked to everything that happened?
You have to wonder if they were trying to protect someone or something.
This is exactly the kind of stuff that keeps people speculating about the JFK assassination all these years later.
I know, it's like a puzzle that's missing a few pieces.
And the pieces we do have don't quite fit together.
Right, and you've got these Oswald lookalikes running around.
Especially this John Thomas Mason guy.
It makes it really hard to believe the whole lone gunman theory.
It's like someone was trying to set Oswald up to take the fall.
Yeah, and the question is who benefited from that?
Exactly who had the most to gain from making Oswald the scapegoat?
Something to think about, isn't it?
I mean, imagine trying to
Really?
figure out what happened back then.
It would be impossible.
You got all these different stories from people who saw things.
Uh-huh.
Maybe some of it's even made up.
Right.
And then you have the possibility that the government is hiding information.
Yeah, no wonder people are still trying to figure out what really happened. You know, when you look at all of this research,
Yeah.
it's clear that this deep dive has only scratched the surface of this whole mystery.
Absolutely.
We've looked at these Oswald lookalikes, especially John Thomas Mason,
Uh-huh.
and it's amazing how their existence adds another layer of intrigue to this whole event.
It really does.
And what's really interesting is that whether these guys were intentionally involved or not,
Right.
they make you question the official narrative.
And the motives of everyone involved.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder if someone was trying to create a story where Oswald was always going to be the fall guy.
It's a very real possibility.
But then who was pulling the strings?
That's the big question, isn't it?
We've seen the connections, the coincidence, the things that don't add up.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, it comes down to what you believe.
Yeah.
You know, listening to all of this has made you even more curious about this whole thing.
Yeah.
I really recommend checking out the Dealey Plaza Echo yourself.
There's a lot more to uncover.
And you might even come to your own conclusions about what happened.
It's a fascinating rabbit hole to go down.
You know, stepping back for a minute,
Yeah.
the JFK assassination is a prime example of how history is rarely simple.
That's for sure.
There are often hidden agendas, things are more complicated than they seem, and there are always questions that never get answered. It's like we're all detectives trying to solve a case, but some of the evidence is missing.
And the pieces we do have don't quite fit together.
Exactly. And I think the most intriguing piece of all might be the lookalikes.
How so?
What if these guys weren't part of some big plan?
Okay.
What if it was all just a series of unfortunate coincidences
Interesting.
that ended up creating a smokescreen and hiding the real truth?
So instead of a conspiracy, we're talking about a chain reaction of events that accidentally made everything more confusing.
Exactly. Like, what if Mason, with his uncanny resemblance to Oswald, was just living his life, totally unaware of the role he would play in this whole historical drama?
And his connections to the Cuban exiles, his time at the shooting range, that encounter with Sylvia Odio,
Right.
all those things could just be random events that took on a whole new meaning after the assassination.
It's like one of those optical illusions where what you see depends on how you look at it.
That's a great analogy.
And it leads to a much bigger question.
Which is?
What if the real conspiracy wasn't the assassination itself,
Okay.
but what happened afterward?
You mean like a cover-up?
Yeah. What if those in power were so afraid of the chaos and the consequences that they decided to focus on the lone gunman theory?
Even if it meant ignoring other possibilities.
Exactly. Even if it meant hiding the truth. So you're saying that maybe instead of a plan to get rid of Kennedy, it was more about damage control.
It's a scary thought, isn't it? It makes you wonder about people in power,
Ah.
how they react when things get out of control, and what they might do to stay in control.
Right. It's like they would rather have a simple lie than a complicated truth.
Exactly. And it reminds us that history is written by the winners.
And that the official story isn't always the whole story.
For sure.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into these Oswald lookalikes, what's the big takeaway for everyone listening?
I think the biggest thing is that the JFK assassination, with all the conspiracy theories and unanswered questions, is a good example of how the search for truth never really ends.
It's a journey.
Yeah, it requires us to be skeptical and to question everything we think we know.
And to be open to different perspectives.
Exactly.
It's like we're all detectives working on a case that never gets closed.
That's a good way to put it.
Always looking for new clues, trying to fit the pieces together.
And sometimes the pieces don't fit.
And that's what makes it so fascinating.
I agree.
The search for truth, even when it's hard, keeps us curious and helps us understand the world better.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
So if you're interested in learning more about all of this,
Yeah?
I definitely encourage you to check out the sources we've talked about.
Like the Dealey Plaza Echo.
Exactly. And do your own research.
You might find something we missed.
And come to your own conclusions about what happened.
That's the beauty of history. It's always open to interpretation.
You know, before we go,
Yeah.
I want to say that the assassination of JFK was such a huge turning point for America.
Definitely.
It was a loss of innocence,
Uh-huh.
and it created a lot of uncertainty and distrust.
And the fact that people are still trying to figure out what happened,
Shows that the past always affects the present.
that's a great point.
Well, that's all the time we have for today.
Okay.
But the conversation doesn't have to end here.
Right.
Keep thinking, keep asking questions, and keep an open mind. We'll see you on our next deep dive.